No wonder people feel paralyzed from all the information. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And I was that person.
I think everybody's different. I'm not going to give you a straight answer on this.
Your muscles release these proteins called myokines that when they enter the bloodstream and travel to your brain, they literally act as antidepressants.
Weight loss and weight gain is not a calorie issue. It's a hormone issue. And these change throughout your lifespan. So
What really helped me start to understand how much protein I'm bringing in.
this is something that's made in the muscle, goes into the bloodstream, and it basically catalyzes learning. Okay? This is why kids who exercise are smarter than kids who don't.
Welcome, everybody. Today, I wanted to jump right in because I was doing a lot of research, Dawn, about our topic today, which is going to be protein. And I'm seeing so much conflicting info on social media, on the internet. Is like one person says this, the other person says the exact opposite. So I'm not surprised that people are like, what do I do? So I want us to set the record straight,
Yeah.
talk about science-backed stuff and things that are actually relevant to an individual who's not particularly into bro science.
Well, and the challenge is, Klaudia, is that, and you've heard me say this before, the DNA that makes up the human race was essentially established, depending on the archaeologist you study, between 100,000 and a million years ago. So our Homo sapien DNA kind of got established. Since then, there have been no extinction events. Okay, it's all there. So without extinction, you don't have evolution. You only have diversity. And so we've been diversifying for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So it's realistic that you can have one reaction. You know, you've heard me talk about you could be vegan and I could be carnivore. You know, this is an ancient. I don't know if you remember the child's the nursery rhyme. Jack Sprat could eat no fat, his wife could eat no lean. Was that a Hungarian thing or is that just an American thing?
I don't think it made it across the ocean.
Okay, so but there's a child's nursery rhyme. It's called Jack Sprat could eat no fat, his wife could eat no lean. So literally, this is a 14, 1500s kind of a thing, and they were identifying the difference there. That Jack ate lean meat, and his wife would eat the fat. I love a well marbled steak, you know, a ribeye that's just loaded with fat. My wife loves petite fillets, no fat at all. I mean, she doesn't like the fatty ribeye. Oh my God, I am a big old happy person when I'm eating one of those. So
Yes.
back on task, away from steaks. We are talking protein, but it can vary. It can vary from person to person, husband to wife, parent to child. It can vary. That's why it's so important for you to learn how to figure out, okay, what am I looking for? What am I paying attention to? How do I make this work?
Yeah, 100%. And protein is one of those things where there's a big divide between if you are not eating meat, you're not getting the right amount of essential amino acids, you are not getting complete protein, so you're missing out on essential nutrients. But on the other hand, some people like if you eat too much protein, it can cause XYZ issues for your kidneys and you can overdo it. And there are these windows that you should eat if you are training, and it's just so much out there in terms of protein. And obviously it is the building block of us as humans. It's so essential for us to grow, to regenerate, and not only for our muscles, but for our brain too. So I would like to kick this off so our listeners can have a little bit of a foundational understanding of what protein is. Can you let us
Yeah, yes,
into
but
what protein is and how we're looking at it?
before we go there, I want to go back and address your last statement. As a scientist, when I see lots of converging data that's not clear, what I see is chaos. Again, we've talked about this before, trying to make meaningful out of chaos. That is the variation. That's why there's so many people saying so many things, because it worked for them, it didn't work for someone else. And nutritional science is notoriously kind of a weak scientific field. They do a lot of memory recall kind of stuff, things like that. And you know what, Klaudia, if you eat a steak in Northwest Phoenix, Arizona, and I eat a steak in Northeast Indiana, The sort, even though it's steak, even though it's the same ribeye, the metabolic the metabolic makeup of that steak could be very different. One could have been grass raised, the other one could have been raised in a feedlot. So again, that's the reason there's so much variation in this. So if you are a listener and this can be confusing, don't feel special because it is confusing and we're working our way through that.
And it's funny how you mentioned, yes, meat is not meat in every grocery store. It could be different, especially
Absolutely.
when it comes to regenerative farming and industrial farming, where the nutrient density of that piece of meat can be so different, especially when it comes
Absolutely.
to even the fatty acids. So that marbled steak that you had, if it was not grass fed and grass raised, then that fat may not be as great as if it were to be raised on actual
Klaudia,
grass.
I
So
grew up
yeah,
on a big beef cattle farm. I mean, so I grew up in the middle of this. We grass fed our beef cattle, but then we grain finished them. And I am such, listen, I eat steak like most people drink wine. I know the vintage I like, and when I get it, I savor it. But yeah, that's exactly the truth. But let's get back to protein and away from steak.
yes, yes.
So,
So
proteins, go ahead.
please go into it. No, I just wanted you to just like take it away because you are the scientist, and I just know protein is one of the three macronutrients that are important. And I probably undereat like a lot of people, especially women in later in their life stages, which we'll talk about. But why is it so important? Like, please tell me.
Well, there's so much of your body that's based in protein. So it's not just that it makes muscles. That's one of the things it does. So anything that you're doing to move, your muscles are made up of specialized protein. They're called actin, myosin, troponin, tropomyosin. These are the things that make your muscles work. But your bones, okay, let's start at the structural base. Your bones have a structure of collagen. Collagen is a type of protein. It's a connective tissue type of protein. And your bones have that protein framework that gets stuffed with minerals. And that's what makes a bone a bone. And so I want to take a step back, and our body has unique ways of storing proteins. Muscle is a great protein storage tool. So that happens a lot. But in the absence of certain amino acids, so a protein is a string of amino acids. Amino acids are the smallest part of the protein structure. They look like a carbohydrate, but they got this little nitrogen structure attached to them, which differentiates them. There's what's called 10 essential amino acids. These are amino acids your body cannot produce on its own. You have to consume them. So there is a need to consume protein, but our body stores our macronutrients, our three macronutrients: fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. We store proteins in muscles. Okay, that's our big protein storage area. We store fatty acids in adipose tissue, and we store carbohydrates as what's called glycogen in the liver and in the muscle, and that's how that is stored. So we have all these three major macronutrients. Then we have what's called our micronutrients. Our micronutrients are vitamins and minerals, primarily phytonutrients, and these are expanding all the time. They wind up being more and more important all the time. And for our listener, I think it's important to get your protein up. There's really no argument about that. And if you get your protein up beyond what you need, hey, here's the great thing. Your body will strip that little ammonia, it'll turn it into a carbohydrate. It's either going to store it or you're going to pee it out. So there's not a huge toxicity issue that goes with that.
Just besides that, so it's become pretty well known that protein is super important for a lot of different aspects of our everyday life. And it's interesting how it's often put in the bucket of if I want muscles, I need protein. But I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit toward how important it is for our brain health.
Yes.
I know you will probably go into some of the neurotransmitters that protein is super important for, but before you do that, I saw this clip a while back on the internet. I think it was either YouTube or social media, it doesn't matter. And this woman, Kelly McGonigal, her last name is a little
Yeah, yeah.
funky. She was
Yeah,
talking about
McGonagall.
hope molecules. And that clip just blew my mind. It made me completely reconsider what it means to contract my muscles and actually put them under pressure and
Hmm.
resistance. Because what happens when you contract your muscles, when you do, walking, hiking, weightlifting, whatever it may be, your muscles release these proteins called myokines that when they enter the bloodstream and travel to your brain, they literally act as antidepressants. They make you be more resilient and more bulletproof in a way in terms of mental resilience, which I wish we had talked about in the previous episode about mental resilience. But it's very interesting to see. And that's why probably a lot of people, when they lift weight or exercise, they have all of these feel good chemicals in them. And part of it is with those happy neurotransmitters that are released. But at the same time, these hope molecules, these proteins, are so critical to building mental resilience over just building strength.
So let's talk about a couple things there. Number one, you talked about neurotransmitters, and you talked about the myokines. Um, these are all proteins. So they're all different strings of amino acids that have different roles. When you exercise, I believe the single biggest benefit of exercise is the production of what's called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is something that's made in the muscle, goes into the bloodstream, and it basically catalyzes learning. Okay. This is why kids who exercise are smarter than kids who don't. So you have this production in the cell that's not just going to the rest of the body, but it's also coming back so that when these things are rising in the bloodstream, when you're consuming protein, when you're consuming amino acids, you create a downstream signaling process. So the muscle cell says, "Hey, there, we've got energy on board, we've got proteins on board." The signal is what's either insulin or insulin like growth factor. But there's a part in the cell called mTOR. This is another protein. And the mTOR protein sees the resources on board and says, "Hey, let's go to work. I'm going to start, cells." That's what basically what cells do is they make proteins. They either reproduce themselves or they make proteins to go other places. And they go to work, and that mTOR goes to the nucleus of the cell, grabs some DNA, pulls it out, goes to the ribosome, and it starts to manufacture these proteins, these strings of amino acids based on the signals that it's getting from the in the nucleus of the cell. So this is working both ways, and proteins are going crazy on this. And this is another reason why you should look at protein. You should look at protein every bit as hard as you look at fats and carbohydrates. Okay, every bit is important. But the challenge is proteins can be expensive. They're the most expensive macronutrient. Carbohydrates are relatively inexpensive. Fats are relatively inexpensive. Proteins are relatively expensive. Now, I don't think they're out of reach, but I do think that we have to pay attention to, that's why we don't eat them as much, is because they just cost more.
That's so sad. One of the most important macronutrients is what costs more. Not cool.
It doesn't have
And there
to.
are a lot of ways that, yeah. But because there's a difference, and I wanted to maybe in a little bit, we talk about the quality of protein that people can reach for, because there are so many ways that you can get protein in, but they are not equally as effective for what you may want to achieve.
I
It's
think
a
you got to be careful there. Be
one.
careful there. That the other thing too is in the bro science, so many times it's, well, you've got to have it at this time of day and this time of day and this time of day. And there's no doubt that there are certain nutrients that you consume that have flood the system and go land on a receptor and have a behavior. I mean, there's no doubt that there's stuff that happens rapidly. But you also have a circulating store of proteins that are going in and out of muscle tissue all the time. Your skin is reforming all the time. That's a protein rich organ that's constantly turning over. So the I think the issue is, don't overcomplicate it. Okay? Try and keep it simple. Let's start by getting, and there's lots of recommendations out there, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. There's better people than me to look at that. But at the end of the day, you can eat more protein, and there's probably going to be a benefit. You can eat more protein early in the day. Probably going to be a benefit because it's satiating you. And again, whether I grow muscle or store fat or burn fat or lose muscle, this is a hormonal issue. This is not a calorie counting issue. Okay. So if I get my proteins earlier in the day, I'm able to keep my insulin levels down. And when insulin levels are up, you got to remember that your body's storing fat. When that says, hey, there's energy on board, let's go ahead and pack this away. That's the evolutionary effect of that. When proteins are on board, it's saying, let's build protein. So if I can keep my insulin levels down and get my protein levels up, that makes a lot of sense for eating earlier in the day. And then if you follow up with your carbohydrates later in the day, when you're getting ready to go into your long fast, that's a good time to put that on board, go into your fast and have those carbohydrates riding with you through the night.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That was one of the things when I've fallen into this world of biohacking, I started to notice that a lot of the biohackers, a lot of the people who want to have an efficient energy expenditure and just efficient way of their body utilizing energy throughout the day, they tend to start their breakfast with a high protein, high fat, ideally low carb breakfast
Hmm.
because that sets them up to a no roller coaster of blood glucose, no cravings. They're not reaching for the next snack 2 hours later. They actually have a sustained energy for several hours, which is what we want for our body to get the most out of the first half of our day when we really want to be cognitively on point.
The brain likes energy from oxidative sources. This is in the
Right.
electron transport. And these can either be proteins, fats, or carbohydrates. A fat gets broken down through a process called beta oxidation, comes into these acetyl CoA molecules that go into electron transport. And the brain, I mean, electron transport loves that. Proteins, if you're using proteins for energy, you're at a pretty big energy deficit because the body has to do what's called deaminate. It needs to break the nitrogen off. Then it turns the protein into a carbohydrate and it goes into its process. But that's probably the the middle glycolytic system. But your body loves that oxidative, and it also loves ATPPC. It loves the stored phosphocreatine. We talked about that earlier, and it's the body's battery. So the brain tends to like those other two. 80% of the oxygen in your body is used by your brain. That
Yeah.
tells you how much the brain loves using oxygen for energy.
What are your thoughts on just taking essential amino acids as a supplement? Because I've seen people try to get in those in addition to eating protein, just the raw material. What do you think?
I think everybody's different. I'm not going to give you a straight answer on this. I think everybody's different. And I think if I have a young person who's trying to build muscle, it's pretty clear that the amino acid leucine is a trigger to muscle growth. mTOR likes leucine. It sees it and it goes crazy. So supplementing amino acids when you're younger does help. There's probably a reason to do that. Then as you get older, maybe second, third part of your life, I see shifting over to collagen proteins more. So these are structural proteins that you're replacing so that you have that on board because that's what's so important later in life is having that structure. So whether it's essential amino acids or amino acid derivatives in your supplements,
It's very
Claudia,
personalized.
there's a lot of bullshit. It's buyer
That's what I
beware.
think. Yeah.
There's a lot of bullshit. But what we do know is we probably need to supplement protein more, mainly because of the cost and the ability to have it in our diet. If, the entire whey protein industry was built on how can the milk industry earn revenue from this thing was a throwaway product in cheese production. When you make cheese, you pull the fats off, you're left with what's called whey. That's the water that's very protein and carbohydrate rich. You dry that out, you wind up with whey protein. That's where the supplement industry came from. Uh, and it was basically someone said, I don't want to throw this away. Can we sell it? And they built an entire industry around it. Uh, I'm not saying it's bad. I don't think it's God's gift. I think it can be a tool used effectively. And you know what? I watch people who work in the bodybuilding space and I think it makes a lot of sense what they're doing. I had a former student, his name's Corey Gregory, and Corey has a company called Max Effort Muscle. His Instagram's very good. I think he does a really good job. But Corey came to me God, it was 30 years ago. He was a student of mine, and he said, "What do you think about the supplement industry?" And I'm like, "Corey, that just isn't my game." Well, this kid has then gone on to start two big companies. The one he has now is called Max Effort Muscle, and it's a great supplement company. He does a really good job. He he has his science that his people listen to and follow and seem to get benefits. So God love him. He's got it figured out for that group. I think that when you shift away from the bodybuilding crowd and you start to shift towards longevity, it makes sense to have a transition there again from amino acid based and essential amino acids to more of a collagen base based on the goals and the objectives you're looking for from your personal program.
Yeah, and then when we're talking about the longevity space, then there is blunting mTOR is actually increasing longevity, or at least from what they've shown in mice. So then it's that game of more protein and then no protein intermittently could be beneficial
Our
long term.
body loves cycles.
Yes.
That's what we know. We have all kinds of cycles. Um, so yes, when you do fast and you shut down, and fasting's primarily about carbohydrates and proteins. I mean, so breaking the fast, it's difficult to break the fast on the back of fats. That's the reason you see the MCT oil in coffee and things like that, because it's not going to trigger, mTOR doesn't trigger off of that. So yes, fasting's important. Fasting's, when you make proteins, not all of them are made correctly. This is what's so important about this, that your ribosome sitting there cranking it out, and if that protein isn't perfect, it just sits there in the cell. Well, if there's too many of them built up, it gets crowded, it gets messy, and you get ill. If you fast, the body has a process called autophagy, which encapsulates that protein, binds to what's called a lysosome. It digests that protein back down to its amino acids so that they can go back into the process and build the protein again and do it correctly the next time. So yes, that is, it's not just, if I'm younger and I'm working with a young athlete who's trying to put on weight, we're probably eating every 2 hours, and we're doing everything we can to trigger mTOR. When you get out of that phase of your life, particularly when you become that child's parent, you need to start thinking about, okay, fasting, am I cleaning up my system? Because it's when you those things will eventually lead to inflammation, and inflammation is what kills most people after the age of 40. Inflammatory diseases. Or if you get through that time and you don't have inflammatory diseases, the thing that will kill you is a fall, and a broken bone, and you throw a clot, and the story is well written. So this is the reason why it's so important to be strong in the third, to be strong in that late phase of your life, and having protein on board but you can build protein late in your life. It's nice to have the right hormones on board and pay attention to make sure that you've got those going, but you can build protein late in your life.
Gosh, you said so much. I kept nodding and I'm like, okay, I want to comment on this. I want to comment on that. And there's just so much that you unpack there. And I think it's wonderful because especially when we're talking about aging, when I was looking at these 12 hallmarks of aging, the loss of proteostasis, the loss of how the body folds proteins and builds proteins is one of the 12 hallmarks of aging. So when things don't get built correctly in terms of proteins, then things start to manifest that are disease, inflammation, and signs of aging. So that's
Alzheimer's.
why the autophagy
Yes.
comes. Yes,
Yes.
gosh, that's why autophagy comes in so handy to get rid of those misfolded proteins and rebuild them correctly. And another thing that you mentioned with the frailty in later stages of life, where if individuals, and I think we talked about this just briefly yesterday, and it was very interesting how you mentioned when somebody isn't eating adequate amounts of protein, the body will strip from its own stored protein,
Exactly.
including bones.
Well, yeah, it's
So
mainly going to
then
strip
you're just
minerals from the
exacerbating
bones.
frailty.
Yeah, you're mainly going to be
Yes.
stripping minerals from the bones. If you need, remember, so we need proteins for enzymatic. So anytime that you have a system in your body, you usually have a system are enzymes that turn on ligands that land on receptors. That's what a system is. So there's hormonal systems, there's all kinds of them. Well, those enzymes that turn on the ligands, these are typically proteins. Okay. So if you don't have that and you need it, your body's going to go try and strip that. It's going to go try and find that amino acid in your storage because it wants it. It needs to make it work. Hormonal regulation comes into play there. If you don't have them there, you can't turn those systems on. Your immune system runs on proteins. Okay. So I don't want to leave our listener believing that proteins aren't important. They're critically important. They play so many roles. And in fact, the great thing about it is it's a relatively cheap, with supplements, you can use a relatively cheap process for raising the level of nutrient density. Okay, but it's always good to get the natural food sources in as well.
Yeah, just sometimes hard to have such a high protein meal. Like even when I were to eat chicken, I get so satiated from a smaller amount, like 4
Uh-huh.
ounces or 3 ounces, where that doesn't give me the right amount of protein. I mean, I will probably butcher the numbers here, but I think 3 ounces is or 4 ounces, somewhere around maybe
Yeah,
25 grams,
yeah, it's the size of a deck of
something like
cards, and
that.
again,
But again, that's also not enough. If I were to just eat 3 meals and each of them would have 25 grams, that's 75 grams of protein. That is
not
not
nearly enough.
enough for my
Absolutely,
physiology. No, I
absolutely.
almost need double in order to maintain and put on lean mass. And I'm not one to be doing bodybuilding. I just want to have a healthy metabolism, and that includes having lean muscle mass and low fat. So it's very easy to undereat protein because most of us don't really know the numbers in which how much protein is in any specific meal. So I think, and what really helped me start to understand how much protein I'm bringing in is like we always talk about tracking, and there are ways to track how much macronutrients you're bringing in. There are different apps. I mean, I used to use MyFitnessPal, and you don't have to use it for life, but use it for a few months to see how much protein and all the other macronutrients you're bringing in with the stuff you're eating, so you have a basic understanding of, okay, I can tweak this, I need to change this is where I'm at, so I can build upon and progress forward by knowing your current state or your current intake of protein.
Awareness is everything. Okay, just having an awareness, so you've got to track it. And I'll tell you, I think we're at the threshold. I believe these apps are out there now. I've not actually used one yet, where I can take a picture of a plate of food and it'll run an AI thing on top of that, and it'll tell me how much protein's there, how carbohydrates and so forth, which is really cool. Okay. And I think as we do this, we're gonna get more. But you can't forget that there's also quality issues. So, as the listeners
Yeah.
out there, pay attention to protein quality when you're looking at this because it does make a difference.
And not only that, especially when it comes to supplements, because yes, you want to ideally get the high quality chicken and high quality beef and high quality fish. But if you do decide to supplement with either protein powders or some other type of like little protein snack bars, it is so important. And I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to look at the label in terms of what else is in that product besides the protein or protein isolate or whey protein, because a lot of these supplements are filled with junk. They're sweetened with artificial flavors,
They're
and it
candy bars.
will wreck
All
you.
they are is candy bars.
Gosh.
Rarely do you achieve your goal eating candy bars.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I
Yeah.
think I
Like
think your
I
recommendations are just really good.
Yeah, I used to fall in the trap of this is a protein bar and it actually tastes great. So it's going to be wonderful. And I wouldn't even realize that if I could, like, I would have two a day. And then down the road, I'm starting to notice I'm gaining weight. I'm like, oh, I'm just eating protein. If I would have only known that there's a hell of a lot more in there than protein and it's filled with sugar and additives.
It wasn't long ago that I remember I think it was M&M Mars started advertising payday bars as high protein supplements because it's this peanut laden bar, but it's on caramel and everything else. I'm just like, oh my God, that's a stretch. But that's what marketing does.
Yeah. That's so that definitely I would highly make our listeners be aware that look at the labels of these supplements if you need to supplement. And more often than not, yes, we do need to add supplements. And I think a lot of people are starting to talk about collagen coffee in the morning or adding protein to your morning coffee, where you get that 30 grams of protein first thing in the morning, especially for women, to kickstart your metabolism and tell your body that everything is cool and you are ready to burn some more fat, as opposed to tapping into your own lean mass for
And if
energy.
you're struggling, if that's not working for you, get with your functional medicine doctor or your doctor and get your hormones checked. Okay. Again, weight loss
Yes.
and weight gain is not a calorie issue. It's a hormone issue. And these change throughout your lifespan. So, and this is why it's so important to pay attention to that.
Yes, thank you so much for pointing that out, because that is so true. And because all of these foods and stuff that you're eating, the protein will impact your leptin and ghrelin hormones, these hunger hormones that will either be elevated or too low. And you end up wanting to eat a lot more than your body actually needs if those are out of whack. So hormones are so important. And of course, we're talking about a lot more than just those hunger hormones.
I was moderating a webinar yesterday on HRV, and the author of the book makes this really interesting connection between the vagal nerve, which is the big nerve that controls your heart rate variability, and GLP-1s. And when you start to look at stress eating, the hormonal response to stress, you can't ignore this. And it's probably, I don't know, is this too strong a statement? It's probably fair to say that you can't achieve your particular goal unless you're managing the impact of stress on your body. That you have to pay attention to that. So that's one of the measurables that you probably need to get on board. One of the other questions I got in the chat was, I work with people who are apparently symptom free but have HRVs 15, 16, 17, 18. And I said, while you may be symptomatology, the symptomatology may be negative at this time, it doesn't mean something negative's not going on. You just don't see the symptoms yet. And so that's why, listen, we've talked about HRV. It's a king indicator for me. But when you start talking about weight gain, weight loss, strength loss, strength gain, fat loss, the hormones are critical. And those hormones, I mean, the stress impact on those hormones is significant.
But yeah, big time. It's crazy how our body is wired to blunt a lot of hormones when we're under stress. So
I'm probably producing a lot of cortisol. That's
a
so
lot of
that's
cortisol,
one
yes.
that's one of the ones. So I'm producing cortisol. Cortisol then interferes with testosterone, both men and women.
Mhm.
Testosterone's critical to formulating new fiber development is critical. You've got to have that testosterone hang on the estrogen on the androgen receptor, which is going to go ahead and give the stem cells the ability to start to make the proteins and the mTOR to come in and follow up on that. So, just moving down that stress, lowering cortisol may be a critical step in your ability to achieve your goals physically.
I agree. I would like to ask you, what do you think is the most, because we talked about a lot of science here. We talked about a lot of down to the cellular level, what happens with when we eat protein, when we don't eat protein, what happens, what our body does with it. But at the end of the day, I'm curious, and I think our listeners could use that one. What is like the super most important thing about protein that you think a lot of people are doing wrong,
My daughter
and
was
how to
up
do it
this
right?
weekend. My daughter was up this weekend from Pittsburgh, and she made a statement that didn't really. I mean, it really rang with me. She says, "When you plan a meal, you plan it around protein. You pick your protein first, and then you build your meal around that." And frankly, I'm not a chef. I mean, I'm a microwave chef. Um, but and I think that if you're really paying attention to a healthy diet, quality of protein, both from natural sources as well as supplements, can be important. Claudia, work with a pro. Find someone who understands this. And I mean a real pro. I'm talking about a licensed dietitian, and I'm talking about one of the better ones of the licensed dietitians. Now, so So, I see people who get on a fitness kick and they're really successful and everyone falls in love with the way they work and they're like, "What are you doing?" And they don't understand why if they do the exact same thing that their friend did, they don't get the same look. It's because we're different. Okay, it's because we're different. Um, and you got to kind of take a step back and think, okay, this is more about what I'm eating and how it is affecting me. So there's a bigger picture here, though. But there are excellent dietetic professionals out there. There's bad ones too. Just like there's good lawyers, there's bad lawyers, there's good doctors, there's bad doctors. From a dietetic standpoint, there's good and bad. Find one of the good ones. And it may be just one meeting. Help me figure this out. And that goes a long ways.
Yeah, and I think to your point, because even just having that broad schedule of how can I fit a gram per body weight protein into my diet every day can be a road that is difficult for people to map out. It was difficult for me at the beginning. Like, how can I fit? Like, I'm 145 pounds. How can I fit 145 grams of protein into my diet in a day? That just sounds so much. Yet the studies are showing that the point 0.8 is too little, so you got to be higher.
Yeah, and so anytime that you are changing something, it's hard. Change is hard. Get get processes in place to help with the change. But once you've figured it out, once you figure, okay, if I get this shake in now and I do this now and I get this meal in now, okay, I'm getting close to my 145 here, which is huge. And all of a sudden it's not hard anymore. Once you've made the change, you've figured out the process, but change is hard. We know this. So know that it's not just going to be a fall off the log easy. It takes work. But it's one of those things that's worth the work.
Yeah, you can't guess your way through it, and you gotta know where you are. So I think for our listeners and those of you watching it, I highly recommend you to grab an app or start to food journal, start to get an idea of where you are and how much protein you're taking in, because more likely is that you are not taking it enough. And I know it was a conversation I had to have with my mom just because I knew she wasn't taking in enough. And I know she enjoys to exercise, she enjoys to be active, but she's also hitting that menopausal age where I need her to have her protein on point in order for her to maintain muscle and lean mass and kind of allow her hormones to be as steady as possible for as long as possible. And protein plays a huge role in that.
And it could be an
But
economics issue. It could be an economics issue. Some people may be moving away from protein. Listen, a box of crackers is a lot cheaper and more satiating than a nice piece of protein. But there's zero nutritional benefit from the box of crackers. They may taste good.
you'll
They
have
may be
another
hyper.
box 2 hours later.
Yeah, but it's still cheaper. So there is an economics issue that you have to recognize, but the value of protein is worth the investment.
I couldn't agree more. Yes. Okay, Dom, what do you think that we haven't talked about that we should be talking about in terms of protein before we wrap it up?
For the listener, this isn't the first time you've heard this talk. There's a lot of bro science. Try not to go down the rabbit hole. It can be a very basic process. Get more protein in your diet. And there's ways to do that, a little bit of research. If you're struggling with it, work with a pro. Or again, I love your recommendation, Klaudia, of using an app to start to develop some awareness. This is how you change things. This is one of the stages of change. You're in preparation. Hopefully, this podcast emphasizes that the hassle of changing, the value of changing is greater than the hassle. Okay, there's absolute value there. And whether it's you talking to your mom, or me talking to a high school kid, or that high school kid's parents, or that high school kid's grandparents, there can be three different recommendations there that go in there. And don't forget about the hormones. Okay, you've got to pay attention to that because they are so important.
They are indeed. That's awesome. Thank you so much. I said all my bits about tracking and getting in more, so I don't think I have anything else to add to that. But that is a wonderful way to kind of come full circle and really realize how there is a lot of confusion out there. And I've seen so many headlines from left and right articles talking about this is how much protein you should be eating. You're not eating enough. Women should have some protein before they work out, blah, 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 blah. But there's just so much. And no wonder people feel paralyzed from all the information. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And I was that person. And it's a trial and error for you individually to figure out what works for you, but you got to start.
Absolutely. And what works for them probably won't work for you,
But yeah,
but it'll help get you on the right track. Start to, again, you are unique. You got to figure out what your recipe, what your operating system is, how that works. Once you have that worked out, life gets a lot easier.
yeah, and it's one of those things where getting to 90% and me getting to 90% will look completely different for both of us. And
Absolutely.
it will look different to third people. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Thank you so much, Don. So much knowledge bombs. If you listeners, whoever you're watching, if you have any questions, you're always welcome to shoot us a message, comment on our videos, or reach out to us. Either way, would be love to communicate and connect with you.
Yeah, reach out on LinkedIn. You can go to my website, trainrecoverwin.com, but we are very accessible. Don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, and make sure to subscribe so you can get a ping when we release a new episode and stay in the loop. Thanks so much, and we'll see you
Have a
next week.
great day. See you, Claudia.